Hey, what's up, everyone? Dragon back again, here to tell you that you should be watching War of the Gargantuas. So, War of the Gargantuas is a 1966 kaiju film, basically serving as a sequel to Frankenstein Conquers the World. And the reason I'm not focusing on Frankenstein Conquers the World initially, while I very much enjoyed that film, I feel War of the Gargantuas kind of takes a lot of the themes and concepts that were introduced in that initial film and really brings them to the forefront. And while being a sequel, I feel it's very kind of loosely connected to that film. Thereby, if you haven't seen Frankenstein Conquers the World, you can easily watch this film and A, not really feel like you're watching a sequel, or B, not really feel like you're missing out crucial pieces of information. Any, narrative connecting points, if you will, to that original film are expressed and explained in this film just through the dialogue of the characters and even a kind of a flashback that retcons Frankenstein's appearance to resemble more of the Gargantuas. So, yep, War of the Gargantuas, basically, you discover these two colossal beings, that they're basically discovering for the first time and realizing that they are, in fact, connected to the events from Frankenstein Conquers the World. The first one is a large green one named Gyra, which they find living under the sea, and another named Sanda, who's kind of a blonde-brown color, who's basically living in the Japanese Alps. And the interesting thing about these two creatures that differ from a lot of other kaiju we've seen in film is essentially, whereas kaiju usually or kind of traditionally have represented essentially forces of nature, elements of, kind of human hubris, these creatures essentially, they don't represent, they're essentially yin and yang, for starters, but what they represent is not necessarily who we are. It is the worst humanity can descend into in Gyra, and the very best we potentially could be in Sanda. And both, are essentially the extremes of one or the other, and both are what we have yet to achieve, one way or the other. You could obviously argue that Gyra is closer to the way we are now, and kind of showing you kind of the ultimate manifestation, if you will, of that level of savagery, of that level of brutality. And surprise, surprise, Gyra is not exactly, very kind to mankind. He frequently attacks human settlements, cities, kills people. This is a situation where you actively see a kaiju targeting humans, eating them, killing them, just for the sole reason of doing so, just for the sake of hurting human beings. Whereas Sanda is a benevolent kaiju. He actually is the polar opposite. He is very much content with just living apart from humanity, and really only comes down from the mountain, really only comes into contact with his brother. And these are the only time, and basically, in a weird way, Sanda is the only one who can accept and tolerate his brother because he loves him as family and is such a benevolent creature, and essentially seeks to kind of turn him from kind of his more nefarious ways, his natural inclination to violence. Whereas Gyra is not evil. He is essentially lacking empathy. He does not do what he does out of malice. He does so more out of just, he does not have that kind of moral inhibitor, that thing inside us, that hopefully inside us, prevents us from just outright killing someone just because. He lacks that. And the only time he really shows kind of any kind of sense of empathy or compassion is to his brother, because they are kind of, of a likeness to one another. But it is a moment in the story where, Sanda returns and sees that his brother has killed and eaten humans for no reason. There's no point in it, and where Sanda just essentially loses his temper on his brother, basically. And it creates this rift and this divide. And then there's this wonderful moment where when Sanda is lashing out at his brother, Gyra seems so taken aback, so confused, and immediately reverting to a state of rage, but you can tell he's hurt by it. He can tell because he does not understand why what he did is wrong. He does not understand why what feels completely normal to him is deemed so morally reprehensible by his brother. And his brother lashes out in a way, not as almost like a scolding parent, but because it is in direct opposition to his own nature. When he's presented by the grisly side of what his brother has done, the side of it in and of itself, triggers something in him. And the fact that it was perpetrated, this act of pure evil, was perpetrated by someone he loves, hurts him and makes him feel conflicted. And because he himself is not used to these kind of conflicting feelings, he's confronted by something he deems as wrong, being perpetrated by someone he loves, it drives him mad to some degree. And, why he lashes out. And essentially, Gyro basically starts going on a rampage and, starts destroying the cities. And Sanda steps in. And it's a very interesting scene where you basically see him putting himself between his brother and the self-defense force, and not allowing his brother to essentially goad him into a fight. You see all these attempts where, Gyro is confused and scared and lashing out at his brother, and his brother is just trying to calm him down, is trying to reach out to him, trying to reach past his rage and show him that while he's sorry for lashing out, but he needs to understand that the way he is wrong. He cannot continue like it. He needs to make a choice. And again, in that moment, representing the savagery of mankind and how it is almost like an affliction, given the state of the world throughout history. And then you see Sanda confronted by the self-defense force firing upon him, his brother having committed these terrible acts of death and destruction, and yet he is unwilling to give in to rage and anger and violence, and only wants to reach out to his brother and save his brother because he loves him at the end of the day. At the end of the day, he is a being that wants, and it might sound a little corny, I apologize, but love to prevail, because he realizes that is the only way they will survive, that the path his brother walks is one of doom, essentially, and that the only hope for salvation either of them have is this other path. So they represent these two polarizing facets of humankind. One is the path we could walk down and are kind of halfway there, sadly to say, and the other shows us that we can not only can we be peaceful and nonviolent, but we can also be benevolent. We can become not keep ourselves from getting worse, not keep ourselves from being the absolute worst we can be, but become so much better than we ever dreamed of being, becoming not just an acceptable force in this world, but a positive force, one that brings about good, one that betters the world. We're so preoccupied with trying not to destroy the world that we never maybe thought about not only not destroying the world, but bettering it, bettering ourselves through the act of bettering it. And that's what these two Gargantuas represent, these two brothers. It represents the very best we could be and the very worst we could be. It is a cautionary tale of, what we might be going down and the hope of what we could achieve if we go the opposite way. It is a very human kaiju story, whereas the kaiju in this film really represent us. And, it is kind of fitting because out of all the kaiju in the pantheon, they are some of the most human-like. And I don't just mean anthropomorphic as a lot of kaiju, because they were tokusatsu effects, and a lot of them were just, actors in suit. A lot of times they had a very kind of human, upright silhouette, a la Godzilla, Titanosaurus, King Caesar, and whatnot. But these creatures look like large hominids of some kind. So they really do feel like an extension of who we are, essentially. And because they grew out of essentially a mutated human being, which was Frankenstein, and Frankenstein Conquers the World. So they are essentially born of an altered human. So one represents, again, in a weird way, perfection in a human. Big, grand, powerful, benevolent. And the other, the worst. Big, terrifying, and monstrous. It's very interesting how essentially the same creature can be essentially a different being depending on who they are. Not what they are, who they are. They are the same thing. But it is who they are that makes them so different, that makes us see both of them in a very different light. Essentially the color of their skin is really the only thing that makes them really that different on the outside. The rest is how they conduct themselves and how they feel they should be in the world. And it's a very touching story, and it's a very moving story. And I had seen it once before when I was very, very young, and then I started watching it as I got older. And as I got older, I was able to kind of understand more what I was saying. I was very taken with this story, and just how moving of a story it is, and how kind of uplifting it is, because it really does show you that we have all the potential in the world, but we have to make the hard choices of going against sometimes our less than better natures to achieve that, how difficult that can be. But what kind of a rabbit hole it is if you start going down the wrong path. And you see how Gyra is just, he's just following this path of wanting this death and destruction, and you see just how easy it is for him, to the point where he no longer understands, or maybe never even understood, why it's a problem. Being that way for him is as easy as breathing the air, essentially, and that's what's both very scary about him, obviously, to us, but as a character, it makes him very tragic, because you realize just how incapable he is of really coexisting in this world, and how heartbreaking it is for his brother, because his brother, like I said, is the opposite of that. And to realize that someone you love is literally should not be. Someone you care about more than anyone else in the world should not be in the world. And how heartbreaking that would be every time you look at them. And no matter how hard you try, they will constantly disappoint you and constantly break your heart. And so it is a very sad story about family and the best and the worst of us. So because of that, I give a War of the Gargantuas the highest of recommendations. And, as you guys know, you watch the channel, big Kaiju fan, it's no secret. But, in my opinion, not all Kaiju movies are made equal, and there are definitely some that, for me, stand apart from the others. I've already talked about a few of them here. The original 1954 Gojira, the 1984 Gojira, which is my all-time favorite Godzilla film, one of my all-time favorite Kaiju films, but this one is up there with all those. I think it is strangely enough, a bit of an underrated movie. I don't hear as many people talking about this one as much as I think they should. Certainly no one really outside of the Kaiju kind of fandom. So this is definitely one I would like to see kind of reach more people. So with that said, War of the Gargantuas. Have you seen it? If so, what did you think? If not, as always, I will try to put links in the description section where you can pick up the film. I think currently right now, the last home release of it is out of print. Although I've heard that the Criterion has acquired the rights to it, so hopefully we'll be seeing a new release of it soon, a beautifully remastered release of it soon. But I'll see what's out there, and I'll try to put what copies of it I can find. If not, I'll just put TBA until something new comes out of it. But as resourceful as you folks are on the internet, I'm sure you can find a way of getting your hands on it. But yeah, give it a watch, and especially if you're not a Kaiju fan or you're really just familiar with the genre, you've maybe just never had an interest of checking it out, this is definitely a good starter one, because it tells a very human story in the guise of giant monsters, but it's really a story about us. So I think this would be maybe a good one for a lot of you guys out there to start out with if you're new to this. It's again, I think you'll be kind of pleasantly surprised by how kind of captivating a story this is, and then hopefully from there kind of get you more curious about other films within the genre, which by all means dive right in. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace!